right. Can we start? Yeah. All right. Welcome. My name is Bruno Almeida. I know that has been 3 long days with a lot of talks, so I would like to actually welcome you and thank you for coming to this one. There has been a lot of great content, and I know that you might be a bit tired. I hope not. I'm very informal, and I hope that you like that type of tone. I hope we can relax. It's been 3 heavy days. I would like to start to mention a bit what is this talk about. So I'm going to talk about public cloud. I'm going to give you an overview over AWS, Google Cloud, and Azure. Then I'm going to tell you a bit about some of the AI and machine learning capabilities of each of them. Now, you don't need to know you don't need to have any previous experience with public cloud. Uh, I will try to abstract some of the concepts. I want us to actually have a vendor neutral type of stance among us and not entering any kind of fanatisms about why one is better than other. I want us to objectively think about public cloud. With that said, some concepts will be highly technical, so there's a kind of a mixed message here, I know. But let me start by introducing a bit from where I'm coming from, so for you to understand my point of view. I'm working in a company called Futurize. Futurize is a software engineering and innovation consultancy company. We like to say that we have Nordic roots and global mindset. We were founded in Helsinki, Finland, but we have now offices among Europe in many countries. We are around 550 people worldwide. We opened our first office in Oslo 1 year ago. We have 5 great people working there, and we are growing there like crazy. And we recently opened an office in Stuttgart. So those are our newest offices from this location. So our main business has been in Finland and in Germany, where we work with companies like BMW and Mercedes. And with retail, we actually work with among different industries. But this is not a sales pitch, so I will stop that. I just want you to understand where I'm coming from. And who am I? I'm a principal architect and technology advisor at Futurize, and I work with cloud, DevOps, security, data engineering, and AI, so different domains. By my accent, you probably realize that I'm neither Nordic or English native speaker. I'm Portuguese native. But I've been living in Helsinki, Finland for the past 6-7 years. So I want to tell you a story about a customer case that I had in Futurize. We had a customer approaching us, and they were, having everything on premise. That was their technology structure. But they had really good business ideas, and they wanted to move to the cloud, and they wanted to explore some AI business-related possibilities. So, and I know that AI is a term that's been thrown around multiple times as a buzzword, but they actually have really interesting possibilities for AI. They were doing predictive analysis, and so they have actually good understanding of the AI and machine learning, but they didn't have the technology capabilities to get there. So, before you start thinking about AI and machine learning, you need to think about the data architecture and data engineering aspects, which they had none in public cloud. So their first question was like, yeah, Bruno, we heard that there's a lot of different public cloud vendors. We talked with some of them, but hey, what are our options? What is the best public cloud vendor? And as good hitchhikers, we know that the answer for everything is 42. As engineers, if we are neutral and not fanatic about a particular technology, we know that our answer, if a manager comes to us and asks hey, Bruno, what is the best public cloud? It depends. It really depends what you're trying to do. What's your business? What's your service? What's your product? What type of technologies in the public cloud you want to use? There's a million different questions, right? And that was also my answer. It depends. You have good AI business ideas, but I need to know more about you. I need to tell you even more what are the options. So, and my background, my expertise has been more with AWS in the past years. I knew Azure and Google Cloud, I have a fairly good understanding, but I had to research a lot in order to answer them about the AI and machine learning capabilities. And starting from a high level, when we look at public cloud, what is actually the global landscape? I know that these numbers are a bit old. 1-2 years in tech industry is a bit old, but I don't want you to fixate on the numbers that much, on the percentage. I want you to have an idea, and I wanted to give an idea because also Gartner also does this yearly. So the market is dominated mainly by Amazon. AWS has the biggest market share. It has been the oldest one. Then we have Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud as the other two big competitors to Amazon. But then all the others are very niche players. And that's also reflected on the Gartner report. So in Gartner, this is from 2018, and they place AWS, Google Cloud, and Azure as the leaders and all the others as niche. But the interesting part is that the report from the previous year, from 2017, on this Magic Quadrant thing, there was 8 more vendors there that they were completely dropped by Gartner. They said they are becoming even smaller than before. So the market has been consolidating among these 3 players, and therefore we focused with the customer on those 3 players: AWS, Google Cloud, and Azure. So starting with Amazon and introducing Amazon. How do you introduce Amazon to a customer? Starting very overview from my personal perceptions. They have been the market leader year over year. They were, in a way, pioneer in cloud infrastructure and platforms. They are extremely customer-centric. It's actually one of their proud statements that they are customer fanatics. And actually, I lived that, and I actually saw that they are very thoughtful towards the customers, and they go the extra mile. I'm not saying that AWS, that Azure or Google, they are not. I'm just saying that one of their flagship statements of Amazon is this. And they have been focusing a lot over the years on providing services that they do the heavy lifting for engineers, right? If you think about, databases, one of their first things was creating a database as a service. Things that you could install, you could operate a database, but they focus into providing, this type of things, commodities in a way, so to say, as a managed service. Things like, object storage, or virtual machines, things that you could, some of them even implement. You have open source solutions to implement, but they focus in providing this as a service. And they are very stable. As a cloud, in terms of SLAs, they usually keep them quite well. And my perception is that they, based also on their documentation and in my experience, is that they are built from an ops guy towards the dev. So they focus more on the sysadmins and on the infrastructure rather than the developers. So the developer experience kind of came second, in my opinion. But overall, they are really good, and they have been improving quite a lot also in the developer experience. Then when I started to check about Azure, and let me remind you that this was from a person that was mostly used to AWS. So I was very AWS-centric at the time. I knew Azure, but when I started to present to the customer, this was my thoughts. Well, Azure has been gaining market share very rapidly. They have been growing like crazy. And one of their good offering and value propositions was that they are, you can use this or you cannot use this. We are good we can work as a hybrid. You can have your things on premise and you can use this in the cloud, or you can use other vendor and use us. So this on-premise cloud or multi-cloud was one of their flagships. They were often advertising that in a lot of services. One thing that ticked me off was that when I check about what regions do you have available, they often refer to Europe North. And me living in Finland, I assumed that meant one of the Nordic countries. But no, it means Ireland, and I didn't understood why. And then there was actually no region in the Nordics. They were saying that Oslo is coming soon, but that's it. So just as a reminder for if you are working in the Nordics, that if you see Europe North, it means more like Central Europe from our perspective. Also, one thing that was a bit interesting to me is that a region has one or more availability zones. And if you are used to AWS or Google Cloud, you know that when they advertise a region, it has at least two or more availability zones, which means that they have, at least in that region, two or more data centers. And so if you go to the Azure, map, you see a lot of regions, but remind that some of them are just one data center. But they do have a paired regions concept that was really interesting, that your resource could be paired into different regions. Now, things that looked quite interesting from a guy that has been working with AWS. Service Fabric, where you could run your containers on-premise and on cloud. Azure DevOps to build your CI/CD pipelines and code repositories. It looked really well thought. And resource management template. I know that this is to infrastructure as a code, and I know that AWS also had that, CloudFormation. We was used to use CloudFormation and Terraform. But the interesting part with the resource management template was that they were advertising that you could deploy your things manually and then generate this afterwards. And I thought that was really interesting. But then talking with some people, I realized that is not really the case. That yes, you can do more or less that, but the value proposition is not there yet. And then Power BI. Power BI is analytics and dashboard visualization. You might know it. Very similar to QuickSight, or very similar to Google Data Studio or ClickView or Splunk. Now, the thing is, Power BI, even though Microsoft advertised this as part of Azure offering, is actually not in Azure. I mean, it's part of your Office 365 subscription. And this was very interesting to me because I heard some customers asking like, "Hey, I want to use Azure because I want to use Power BI," and I was like, "Wait, no, you can just use Office 365. You don't need Azure for that." So it was interesting that even though the marketing team in Microsoft advertised that as part of Azure, it's not really that. So just as a quick side note, although Power BI is really interesting and very powerful. Now, Google Cloud. Google, we all know that they have a very strong focus on innovation and providing services that you couldn't really reasonably build by yourself. Good examples of that are, for instance, Cloud Spanner. They have a database that is globally distributed and available, a relational database. So now think on that. Like, they have things that you could build it, but it will take you a lot of time to build it. So from a developer point of view, the services are very well thought, of course, with the SRE mindset in mind, in play in most of the services. Some services, they released it as open source. Others, they didn't open source it, but they offer as part of Google Cloud. Examples of that is Kubernetes, that came from Google, and they released it as open source. And others like Dremel that evolve into BigQuery that is only available in Google Cloud. Now, things that looked quite interesting for an AWS guy. PubSub. And PubSub is a message queue. And the part that's, okay, message queue is not that sexy, I know that. But the part that looked interesting is that they combined what in AWS is SQS and SNS into one product. So in the same product, you can push and subscribe rather than using separate services like I was using in AWS. So most of the servers were global by default, and that was something that was very interesting because in AWS, most of the servers are not global. You need to build that by yourself if you want. And they have really interesting AI and machine learning capabilities, and that I will discuss those a bit more, but those were very visible from their offering. And they are the only of the three clouds that have a data center in Finland. This is probably not relevant to you, but it was to me at the time. And there was a clear bet from Google in the Nordics, and I think that was also visible on that. Although AWS fairly recent opened a region in Stockholm, so they are also starting more and more, the three players, to go towards the Nordics. Now, this is cool as an overview, but let's get to a bit more to the beef. And when we think about public cloud, there's a wide range of services. If you have worked with only one of them, you know that there's a lot of services. Maybe we only use half of that. Now, all of the services in the three public clouds are basically built from four different pillars. And if you think about, they all need compute, network, storage, and security and identity. And if you think about computing power, or any kind of compute, in AWS, we have virtual machines via EC2. In Google, we have Compute Engine. In Azure, we have Azure Virtual Machines. So virtual machines is kind of a commodity. All of them have it. All of them also have, if you want to run containers, Kubernetes is in the three of them, as an example. Also, serverless functions as a service, Lambda, Azure Functions, Google Cloud Functions, all of them have that. So it was becoming a lot hard for me to understand, like, okay, what are the differences here? Then network, the three of them, you can have private subnets, public subnets, VPCs, CDNs, so like CloudFront, Azure CDN, all of them were providing the same type of services. You go to storage, all of them have an object storage like S3. They have a block storage. So all of them offer the same type of things, even in storage. Now, security identity, same story. Identity access management, like IAM, is a very concept that's spread in the three clouds. It's very built in, very polished in all of them. I will say that maybe AWS is a bit more granular, but overall, the concept is there. Now, there are, of course, some extra services that you could consider as security and identity. And one case is, for instance, Azure Sentinel or AWS Inspect, that they are managed services that are available, that belong to security and identity. And there are some differences, substantial differences in them. But overall, what I got was that, okay, for very simple type of use cases, any cloud is fine. If you want to run a service, you will find some building blocks to build your things there in any of the clouds that you pick. Of course, we know that there are some differences depending on the type of services that you use. And one thing that was very visible for me was, for instance, I was very used to AWS Lambda, to functions as a service. So one of the first things that I tried in Azure was, for instance, Azure Functions. And I don't know what you guys feel about it, but I think it kind of sucked. Because, I'm sorry, I'm not from Microsoft, I can say it. At the time, when I checked it, I usually do things in Python. And Python was in preview. Node.js was in preview. And I was like, what the hell is 2019, guys? As a note, they released it as full-fledged support, so it's not in preview anymore. But there was clearly it was clearly a sign that some services, even though they all offer the same services, some services are more polished, more evolved in some. With that said, I can also tell you that one thing that AWS was very pioneer, and there were things that they did, there's things that they didn't did, or they did wrong, and they didn't correct it yet, that both Google Cloud and Azure got it right from the start. And it goes with the experience. And I can give you a very simple example. In AWS, when I deploy a resource in an account, I cannot filter them. So if I have multiple resources, I cannot say this belongs to this project, this belongs to that project, unless I use tags. Tags is the only way that you have to filter your resources. Now, it was marvelous to go to Google Cloud and Azure when there was, a way to group them. The resource. There was resource management. There was project management in both of them. So I don't need to create a new account just to see only the resources from a project. So that's a very simple example on the experience that it showed me that some of them really thought this thing through. From they learned from maybe AWS mistakes or gaps, and they built that there. So it really goes with the type of services. So at this moment, I cannot advise you. I couldn't advise my customer like, yeah, go with A, B, or C, because for what you want to do, which was mainly a data lake and data analytics, uh, you were okay with with the three of them. You had some support there. Now, when I started to dig a bit more on the AI and analytics and what are the capabilities, so what do they offer, how do they differ, and in here I'm thinking like, okay, there's a lot of AI talk, especially in marketing terms, in the services. There's a lot of products being released all the time. How do I group it? How do I present this to this customer? So I group this in three ways. You have the data engineering services, things that help you to ingest, transform, prepare the data, analyze the data. Then you have things very specific to AI and machine learning, like the platforms, to build your models, to train your models, to deploy your models. And then you have some APIs that are pre-trained models that are completely serverless as an API, and it's out of the box. That offers some capabilities. So those are the way that I group this I group this in three type of bubbles. And on the data engineering, I'm talking about services like when you are preparing a data lake, you need to ingest the data, you need to transform the data, you need to make it available maybe via a data warehouse and having some kind of analytics capability, right? And the three clouds actually have services for that. Of course, it's like a checkbox that they need to mark, they need to have it. And they were actually fairly good, both the ingestion and preparation. So, you have event hubs, you have in Azure, you have Kinesis in AWS, you have PubSub, as I mentioned before. So all the way the ingestion to the data warehouse, fairly similar capabilities. Then on the machine learning, not so similar capabilities. They do have SageMaker and Cloud Data Lab and ML Studio. Then on the analytics BI, AWS has QuickSight, Google Cloud has Data Studio, Azure has nothing. Office 365 has the Power BI. So that was when I realized that there was that slight difference. But for the data engineering, quite okay. If you want to specifically train machine learning models and deploy them, there was some differences here. So I could clearly see that with the SageMaker, Google was offering support in multiple different platforms, multiple tooling, like Terraform and I need to check my canvas. Sorry, that MXNet, among others. But it was very clear that Google Machine Learning Engine and Azure ML Studio, they didn't have the same amount of tools, but they did have the major tools. So TensorFlow is something that it's very common to the three of them, and it's one of the major tools used for this. They have multiple components, but overall, depending if you want to use a very specific tool, you might want to pick AWS. But if you're using SageMaker, no difference, right? You are fine. So this is the part where the feature completion of each service comes into play, that you need to actually check what is their support. But SageMaker is one of the most widely used, and I actually like to see that was common to the three of them. Now, one part was the AI machine learning APIs. So these are the APIs that you have. Those are pre-trained models that are available to you as an API. And I'm not sure if you know this or not, but they have been there for quite some time. And if you think about Google, and most of us use Google Translate. As an expat, I use it almost every day. Google Translate is actually built on top of this API. If you don't want to use Google Translate as a web page that you go and put the text, if you just want to use the API, you can use it. It's in Google Cloud. So this type of translation APIs, or image recognition, or sentiment analysis, are there, and they are basically one API call away from you to use it. I tried this, in all fairness, in AWS, like AWS recognition, maybe a couple of years ago. I think it was when it was just launched. and it kind of sucked. And I was like, oh, is this all you got? So I remember that I tried it, and at the time it was like, okay, this is not much useful to me. So now that I had this project, I decided to check a bit more, like, hey, what kind of things do you have there? And I was amazed to see that in all the three public clouds, there was huge amount of these APIs available. And there was even some of them that were a bit more weird. Like in Google, they have this cloud genomics to store and analyze genomes. And I'm like, who the hell uses this? But apparently they have someone that uses that. And it was really interesting, or things to help you with job discovery. So they have some of these interesting things there. Also, their text-to-speech and speech-to-text, especially in Google, was quite good. I was really amazed to see that the capabilities there. And like I advised the customer, and the customer made their own pick. But I got this, the evolution of this AI and machine learning APIs was something that it got stuck with me. I was like, oh wow, this evolves so much. So after I made this study, presented this to customer was happy, and I got home in that day after I presented this to the customer, and I thought like, hey, I was reading the news. I like to consume. I consume a lot of news, and there was a video of Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump was complaining about fake news. That's not the news, but that's quite common. But it took me like he was complaining about oh, those websites are clearly fake and whatnot, and I was like, how hard it will be to companies to actually detect if it's fake or not. So I thought like, hey, what can actually this serverless APIs and machine learning APIs that can tell us about this news media website? How good are they? What can they tell us? Will there be any differences if I throw a URL? If I have some data from a URL that is a fake news and one that is some credible news, will it find some differences like on the results? And what will it say about credible media? We all know that some media outlets should be neutral, but they are not as neutral as they should be. So what it will say? And as an engineers, we know that it's fairly easy to extract data from websites, and that's what I started. That's how I approached the problem. Like I'm gonna do, no AI fancy stuff for now. I'm just gonna try to extract some data from websites. So I'm gonna start with, I'm gonna visit the website, gonna get the screenshot of the website, the front page. Then I'm gonna extract the text from the website, and then I'm gonna get all the child images that I can find in the website, and I'm gonna use then those against those AI machine learning APIs and see what I get, just by curiosity. And that's exactly what I did. So I was very impressed with Google, so I started with Google mainly, and all my, just as a disclosure, I actually have a separate talk about this, and I actually have a paper published in the Fake Intelligence Summit that was in Finland. So I can give you the results of that. They are available online. I can just point you to the link, so just drop me a message. I'm not going to go that much on the results here because we will not have time. I just wanted to tell you about those APIs and the experience of using them. But if you're interested in the results of this, just let me know. But as an example, what type of things you get, for instance, throwing the website, the screenshot of the front page of the website, with things like Google Vision API, and you get things like labels, safe search. You can actually see there the outcome of the safe search. Based on this particular screenshot, it says things like adult is very unlikely, violence as a content also very unlikely, and on the text it gives you can throw with the natural language API and get very quickly like classify this text or what kind of sentiment this text gives. So those were really cool. I got some really interesting results from that. In practice, this actually worked like this. So I used Google Cloud client installed on my laptop. So the G Cloud, and basically is as simple as calling like this, like gcloud ml language classified text. This is the text. What do you know about that? It was so easy to use that it kind of hurt that I didn't try that before, right? And you get a huge amount of data coming from that. You can actually see on the right side, left side to you, no, right side to you. You can actually see the amount of data that you get, for instance, from that classified text. So you get a lot of data, but what does it actually tell us? So a couple of interesting, in the middle of all that JSON, a couple of interesting things that I discovered, for instance, for this particular website in this screenshot. So the labels. So it detects that, there's a suit, it's very formal, white collar workers, management, employment. This was the same week. I did this for every day for the same week while the Brexit negotiations were. So you will see some Brexit things coming up. It's because of that. It was the last week of Brexit, right? And so there was a lot of content in the media about that. But you got things like, on the sentiment, you get the magnitude and the score. And the score, for instance, goes from -1 to 1. And if it's 0, it means that the text sentiment-wise is neutral. If it's -1 or from 0 to -1, it means that it's slightly negative, or from 0 to 1, that is positive. So you have a score and then the magnitude of that score. And the test classified gives you it classified correctly as, okay, I got the screenshot of the website, it said this is news. That's nice. And also Google gave me this visually similar images. So it gives me from what it knows about the internet, which is being Google, I assume it's a lot. It gave me some URLs of images that are similar to this. Now, if you use Google every day on Google search, you know that you have this images part. And I guess it's kind of what powers that, because if you throw an image there, it will give you similar images to it. So it was very interesting to see all of those things, but as a geek on the terminal, as a JSON. So all of those things are available to you. But you might be wondering, also because we are NDC, I don't know, there's a lot of Microsoft people. Who is using Google Cloud? Just go. One guy, two guys. All right? Who is using Azure? All right. Who is using AWS? Okay. So who is using no cloud? Okay. I hope this has been useful so far. So Microsoft Azure guys might be wondering, what about Azure? We have a cloud too, and we like it. It's actually quite nice, Azure. I like it a lot. So I tried the same thing with Azure. And so I took the same website, same screenshot, same text, and what do I get from that? So they have this, as I mentioned, the cognitive services, the computer vision and text analytics, so sentiment analysis. So you get, for instance, for the screenshot, also good text, is a screenshot. It's a person, there's a suit, there's a woman, there's business. So those labels were actually quite good. Then on the text analysis, it gave me a score of 0.5. And then it got me thinking 0.5, is that cute, bad? Is it the same scale as what Google was doing? No, it's not. So in Azure, the scale of the text analysis goes from 0 to 1. And this text actually comes from their documentation. And then I say values close to 0.5 are neutral or intermediate. So I got 0.5 in both. So it either indicates that the text is sentiment-wise neutral, or that it cannot be analyzed and the score is always 0. I don't know. I got very confused. Did you classify this or not? Is this neutral or not? So now you might also wonder that, why do you got 2 results from a block of text? And you actually might notice that I'm passing a JSON there. And this is because with Azure, there was no way that I could pass the entire text. I had to pass paragraph by paragraph. So I had to actually structure that into a JSON document that looked like that. So and I had to put one by one. So I had to transform my text. I only put 2 paragraphs. I was a bit too lazy for that, to be honest. It was a long text to extract from each screenshot. But then okay, and I got that. And then you might also be wondering why are you using Python to do this? In Google Cloud, you just use the client tools. And that's because you can't. So, someone working for Microsoft here? Not working with Microsoft, but for Microsoft? Okay, I'm gonna take a bit of a stab at you. Let's go talk about developer experience, okay? So, you use Azure Cognitive Services, cool. It gives you quick start. You can use this, sentiment analysis and vision API in 2 steps. So you grab your keys, cool, and then you either run it in a Docker container, which is in preview, or you use the web API call. Like, I don't want to use the Docker. First is in preview, and I'm gonna use this from my code, or at least from the command line. I just want to get the JSON. So I went with the API call. Like, let's go. Let's see what this gives. And this gives a quick start with Python. And I'm like, cool, I like Python. But then like prerequisites, 2 extra libraries. I'm like, okay, I've been using Python. Why do I need to install this to make an API call? And then they have an example code that's on the same document. And the example code, I realized why they need to install those 2 extra libraries, because they want, in the end of it, to display the image. I'm using this from a console. I didn't understand why, so I just removed that and just use native Python things that you always have installed, and yeah, I got exactly the same result. So, there's absolutely no need for you to install extra Python things. You can just use the normal Python libraries. Then you get a lot more cleaner thing. So that was the reason why of that script. But then on the sentiment analysis, because it's not the same Python script for both. You notice that the file name was different. So I started like, okay, I need to use again go through this. I'm gonna try the Docker container, which is in preview. Cool. First thing, this command allocates 1 CPU with 4 gigs of memory. I want to make an API call, not a spatial satellite. It exposed a TCP port. I'm like, what the? Why? And then I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go with it. I run it, and you get that nice output. It says something about Japanese language is missing. It's okay. I didn't need it. And then I go to that URL that I get from my own Docker container, and then I realize why I need the expose a port and 4 gigs of memory. There's a nice Swagger interface that you can just put your request and get the response. But I just didn't got it. Why I need to run something with 4 gigs of memory just to make an API call? So guess what I did? I get again a Python script. I just trashed this, and I went to the API way, and I got the exactly same result that I got with the Swagger. And it was a lot easier to do. But overall, besides this quirk, it was actually quite nice to get the Azure results. So don't let this set you off on Azure for not using it. After you pass that barrier is actually quite nice. But you might also be wondering, like, what about AWS? Like, did you give it a try? And yes, I did. So in AWS, very similar to Google Cloud in the sense that I can use the client tool and the services recognition similar to the Vision API, and also comprehend for the sentiment analysis. So very interesting. Same with the image, you get really interesting labels, very similar to the other ones. People, business. Although it didn't sound, if you look at the labels itself, it seems that Azure and Google Cloud were a bit better. And then on the sentiment analysis, I got this neutral. Now, let me take a bit of a stab at that. So you might notice that I shortened the content of the text that I'm sending. And the reason was that I couldn't send that entire text. Contrary with Google Cloud, where I can just throw the entire text, with Amazon, it says that the input exceeds the limit. So you need to be at least aware of that you cannot throw everything. And also, I was a bit surprised with the text analysis. And then I started to try out different things. So the first was that I'm going to analyze the first text. Hello. What is the sentiment on this? Neutral. Like, okay, I thought I was being cheerful to you, Amazon, but okay, so I'm going to trick you. I'm going to say drugs are good. Positive. I'm like, okay, we're having a party here. And I'm like, okay. drugs and violence are good. Positive. Like, okay. Drugs, crime, murder, terrorism, and violence are good. Neutral. So, yeah, okay. So I wouldn't try. I mean, yeah, I got a bit disappointed with after doing this simple test. But I'm not sure. Maybe there are good things with it. But at least the recognition was quite cool. So at least the vision, image analysis was really nice. I got a bit ticked off with the comprehend. But hey, I hope that you enjoy it. Feel free to ping me. If you have any questions now, I'm happy to answer. And also feel free to reach me out after the talk. Here's my contacts. Thank you.